Well, it's a real pleasure to be here on Staten Island. I think this is the second time in my life I've been on Staten Island, so it's great to be here and see your home. It's great to be here and not in Syracuse, New York, where I was 2 nights ago on trial for being one of 38 people who was arrested for challenging the drones. Syracuse is a nice place, but I just don't want to be on trial. And it's great to be here tonight instead of an Israeli prison where some of my friends are right now, who are part of the latest wave, the freedom waves of the Gaza Flotilla of men and women from around the world that are challenging the Israeli policies on Gaza. Well, so there are a lot of reasons that I'm glad I'm here in Staten Island. As a retired Army colonel, 29 years in the U.S. military, and then as a former U.S. diplomat who resigned in 2003 in opposition to the war in Iraq, it is a pleasure to be with you all who over the many years have been the stalwarts of the peace and justice organizations in your communities. I've been honored in the 8 years that now I've been out of the government to be accepted into peace action groups throughout the country and to be able to participate in lots of actions that are going on in our local communities as well as international actions. And as you award tonight your thanks to men and women in your community who have been helping the Staten Island Peace Action Group, I want to talk a little bit about things going on here in the country and then things outside the country. I mean, we still are, we're still at war. We're still at war 10 years in the war in Afghanistan, 8 years in the war in Iraq. President Obama says we'll be reducing the number of people, the U.S. military in Iraq by, we'll move our military out of Iraq by the end of some year, next year?
This year.
This year. The end of this year? Well, he doesn't say anything about the numbers, the tens of thousands of private contractors that are going to remain, the numbers of private security firms that will then provide the security for the largest embassy in the whole world, the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. Many private security firms are now getting multi-million-dollar contracts to provide security for that U.S. installation, that U.S. embassy. That U.S. embassy that will have, as a part of its surveillance apparatus, 2 drones that will be protecting the U.S. embassy. Afghanistan, the good war, as President Obama was calling it, as a candidate, warning us that he would increase the military operations in Afghanistan because it was the good war. And we know that he has that part of the promises that he made to America he's kept. That indeed we see a huge increase in the level of deaths that are going on in Afghanistan. Deaths of U.S. forces, of course, but a remarkable increase in the number of deaths of Afghan civilians. And many of those Afghan civilians now dying because of the use of our unmanned aerial vehicles, the drones. Those drones, those assassination drones, those execution drones, those drones that we got arrested for on April 22nd. 38 of us at Hancock Air Force Base were arrested for disorderly conduct and disrupting traffic flow by laying down with shrouds over us, spattered with red paint to symbolize the blood of civilians in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Somalia, in Ethiopia, in Yemen. Those drones that are the things that now we have a civilian committee in the National Security Council that makes the decision on who is going to live and die. Not our court system, our courts where evidence is presented if somebody is being accused of breaking laws or criminal activities, and evidence presented and the court decides whether or not the person is guilty. And now we have civilians outside the judicial system that are making this decision for men and women all over the world. whether they live or die, and also now of Americans. We now have 2 Americans that have been assassinated by our own execution drones. And the numbers of military bases now in the United States that are a part of the drone network. There are about 35 military bases now that have drones or drone components. The 2 main ones that we know about that are operating the drones in Afghanistan and Iraq and Yemen are Creech Air Force Base outside of Las Vegas, Nevada, and Hancock Air Base in Syracuse, New York. Now, most people in Syracuse, New York didn't realize that they were a part of the war, an active part of the war in Afghanistan. And indeed, those men and women that are operating the drones, both in Creech and in Hancock Field, are considered as now enemy combatants. They are, in the United States, they are perpetrating the war that's going on over in Afghanistan and Iraq. And some of the peace activists up in Syracuse are saying to their own people in their neighborhoods, we should be very wary, because the war has been brought home. It's brought home right now in Syracuse, New York. It's brought home in Creech Air Force Base, right outside of Las Vegas. It's brought home to 35 military installations around the country. It's brought home, to the University of North Dakota, where now we have the first civilian training center for operators of drones at a major university in the United States. Yeah, those drones that have killed over 3,000 Afghan civilians. And of course, our government says, well, now those are good drones. They prevent our soldiers from having to be on the ground, that we can have a surveillance network, that we don't have to put our own soldiers down in harm's way. And these things are so precise, and we have such good intelligence that, we only go after those people that we know are shooting against U.S. Military or are acting against U.S. interests in Afghanistan or Iraq. But then we also know that our intelligence really isn't so good. You just look at the #1 cause of the Iraq War, according to the Bush administration, those weapons of mass destruction. That intelligence was really good, wasn't it? Yeah. Well, it follows in that same way that the intelligence that we're picking up for the targeting for these drones is not so good either. And those groups of people that have been killed by drones, that our drone operators, when they fire those rockets from Creech Air Force Base into a group of people that they are being told are militants, and then those young operators go home to Las Vegas, Nevada, and have their dinner with their kids that night, and then they wake up the next morning and look at the paper and start reading it, and that group of 80 people were not militants. That was that wedding party. And that's happening with more and more frequency. And when you see the extraordinary problems with international relations in terms of the United States and its ally in the war in Afghanistan, that country next door, Pakistan, and when you have Pakistani officials who are bluntly telling the United States, you are shooting yourself in the foot as you kill all of these people in Pakistan. That the retribution factor of the use of these drones is going to be probable. I mean, when you look at the proliferation of drones around the world now, the United States being the biggest purveyor of drones, we build more, we sell more. Israel is #2. They sell lots of them. And now China is embarking on the development and selling of drones. And in a recent air show in Beijing about 3 weeks ago, the Chinese government unveiled 25 different types of drones that they're now developing. So these things are going to be available for nations and groups to buy. And if one believes that what happened on 9/11 is kind of a blowback from U.S. policies in the Middle East over the years, then one would suspicion that probably the use of these drones, these assassination drones, these execution drones that we're using in Afghanistan and Yemen and Iraq, that will come back to haunt us. And that's why 38 of us got arrested at at Hancock Air Force Base. Others have been arrested at Creech Air Force Base earlier in the year, and then last year we had 14 people arrested. I testified at their trial as a expert witness. The two real expert witnesses we had at that trial were Ramsey Clark, former Attorney General, and Bill Quigley of the Center for Constitutional Rights. Well, 2 days ago, we were honored in Syracuse, New York, at our trial to have Ramsey Clark come to the trial. I don't know if many of you listened to Democracy Now! Yesterday morning. Well, Amy Goodman made reference to Ramsey Clark's testimony in that trial. It took a long time to get his testimony admitted because at this little town court, I mean, it's not even a county court, it's the town court of the little village of DeWitt, New York. A little town court that doesn't even have day court. We had to do night court every night from 5 to 11, and the trial's still going on. It started on Tuesday night, and we finally got Ramsey Clark into the court, and it took 2 hours for this city court judge to be convinced that Ramsey Clark, former Attorney General of the United States, and with a history of international experience longer than this room is long, to convince that judge that he should be qualified as an expert witness. But finally he was. And then Ramsey Clark started talking about the things of his concern about the use of these drones. His concern about the Nuremberg principle. What we were asking him to talk to the court about was that we the defendants had the responsibility to do what we did, to lay our bodies down on a road, symbolically saying to our nation, we don't want these drones to be used. And that it is our obligation and our responsibilities to speak up when we feel our government is doing something wrong. And these drones, we believe, are wrong. And Ramsey Clark came through and said, through the Nuremberg principles that were developed after World War II, where there were members of the German government and the Japanese government who knew what was going on, who knew, in the case of Germany, that there were an extermination of 6 million Jews that were going on, that they should have spoken up. And because they didn't speak up, that they followed orders, that they should be punished for that. And in that same manner, that we accept our responsibility as people who are working for peace, that we will put down our bodies to challenge these policies that we believe are wrong. If you saw the New York Times 2 days ago, on the op-ed section, there was an article that was written by a lawyer who works for Guantanamo detainees. This guy's name is Clive Stafford Smith. He's a Brit, and he has been working with Gitmo detainees for many years now. He had flown over to Pakistan to be in a meeting with some of the tribal elders along the border with Pakistan, to hear with his own ears what the problems of the things that were being faced by these tribal elders. And with them was a young man, a 16-year-old young Pakistani kid that came with the tribal elders. And Clive Stafford Smith says he talked with him through a translator for quite a while and developed a real kinship over this day that they were together. And then he writes in the bottom part, this was Friday a week ago. The following Monday, a drone followed a vehicle in the border region of Pakistan. A drone followed a vehicle, fired on the vehicle, and this young man, 16-year-old kid, and his 14-year-old brother were blown up by this drone. These drones are terrible, but we are the ones that will stop this. We are the only ones that will be standing up to our government. And thank you. I want to put it on here. And standing up to things like the drones, and then standing up when we see other types of oppression that are going on. I mentioned the Gaza Flotilla. I was on board the 2010 Gaza Flotilla that the Israelis attacked. 6 ships are part of that flotilla. One of the ships, the large ship, the Majorie, the Turkish ship, on which 9 people were murdered. 9 people were murdered by the Israeli military. 50 people were injured. Of the 9 people, 1 was an American citizen, a young man born here in New York by the name of Berg. The United States government has not investigated on its own his murder, his death. They have not investigated smaller portions of this, much less important, but of the piracy of taking U.S. flagged ships. There were 2 of them as a part of that flotilla. Taking them, and the Israelis still have them. Taking all the possessions of all the 700 people that were on board the flotilla, and still not returning those possessions of cameras, cell phones, computers to people. This last summer, another flotilla. When I came back from the previous year's flotilla, there had been 14 of us that were from the United States that had been on that earlier flotilla. When I came back, I was determined that if there was another flotilla, we were going to have a ship in it. The United States was going to have a ship. And many of you all were so kind to contribute to that U.S. Boat to Gaza initiative that we had. The U.S. Boat to Gaza, we named the Audacity of Hope. Right back at the Obama administration, which, like all the other administrations, has been protecting Israel from the criminal acts that it's been committing on the Palestinian people. We raised money for a boat. We went to Greece. We bought a boat. We got a boat. We got it outfitted. We had passengers, crew, journalists in Greece ready to sail for Gaza. And then, how many of you all know what happened? A few of you. Well, the blockade of Gaza came forward to Greece, that the Israeli government put the heavy hand on the Greek government to not let those boats sail from Greece. And we were stalled there. Our boats were imprisoned. They were by court order ordered to the docks that we couldn't move those ships. Well, we had a boatload of American activists on board. So what happens when you have 35 activists, crew members, journalists that are saying, well, we don't listen to what our government says in the United States. We challenge them there, so why don't we challenge the Greek government? And that's what we did. And you may have seen it on Democracy Now!, where the Audacity of Hope broke the lines from the pier and off we sail to Gaza. And we got 5 miles before this time it was the Greek commandos that came after us. And with their weapons pointed at us, saying, you're not going any further. And indeed, they pushed us back to the docks. Our Audacity of Hope is still in Greece. It's still imprisoned by the Greek government. And of course, we're suing them, but right now they still have that boat. Out of the 10 boats that were part of that flotilla, one ship that actually sailed from France actually made it to 50 miles off Gaza before the Israelis stopped it and took the people off the boat, deported them, and then took that boat into what is now becoming quite an armada that the Israeli government has of boats that have been used by activists to try to break the Israeli blockade of Gaza. And then, just this week, we've had 2 more boats that have tried to break the blockade. Those 2 boats were a part of this last summer's flotilla. One was already in Turkey. It had had its propeller shaft cut by Mossad. I'm sure it was Mossad that cut the propeller shaft, and they had done the same thing to one of the boats in Greece. But we had one boat that was in Turkey, and then the Canadians were able to somehow get their boat out of Greece. We still haven't quite figured that one out, how they got their boat out and we haven't. But that aside, they had their boat also in Turkey, and in a very quiet operation, we were able to set sail. Those 2 boats were able to set sail from Turkey to challenge the Israeli blockade. We had sent 6 American activists to be a part of the 35 people that were going to be on board the Canadian ship. In a strange maneuver, the Turkish government decided that only 12 people could go on that boat that previously had been rated for 70 people. But the Turkish government, whom we thought was kind of, we've heard the stories in the newspaper that the Turkish government has said, we will send a ship, a military ship to protect humanitarian cargoes going into Gaza. Well, it didn't quite translate to the Turkish Coast Guard. And they only allowed 12 people on the boat. So we only had one American citizen that was on among the two boats. Her name is Kit Ketterich, and she's from the Seattle, Washington area. But we had 5 other people that were in Turkey ready to go if they had been allowed on the boat. Medea Benjamin, Code Pink Women for Peace, Ty Berry, Robert Naiman of Just Foreign Policy, David Schimmerhorn out of the Seattle area, who's been on 5 of the boats that have tried to get into Gaza, and Paki Whalen out of Western Massachusetts. All of those people actually have tried to go to Egypt to see if they can't get overland into Gaza, and then try to get a boat there to break the blockade in the other direction, to go out of Gaza, to take exports out of Gaza. Because that blockade of 1.6 million people that live in Gaza, that blockade that will allow nothing to come in and no exports to go out. It's a blockade that has to be broken. A land blockade that has to be broken, as well as that naval blockade. Well, people are being deported right now. They all are in prison in Israel, probably at the same prison we were 2 summers ago. Kit Kitteridge is supposed to be coming out of Israel tomorrow, landing in JFK, probably on the El Al flight, we think. And then the others will be coming in day after day after day into their homes around the world. There were 10 nations that were represented among the passengers on those 2 boats. So as we continue to work with as Palestinian issues as being things that most peace action groups are working on in some way, committees that are formed, as the Palestinian people have now presented their plea to the United Nations for some sort of status, some sort of recognition. We know that just this last week UNESCO recognized the Palestinians. And of course, what did our government do? Our government has now said that it will not contribute $70 million, which is in its allocated share, 22% of the budget of UNESCO. The United States will not give to UNESCO as retaliation for the members of UNESCO voting to have the Palestinians in. There are 11 million Palestinians in the world, and there are many countries that have populations of less than 100,000. And yet the United States of America continues to say that the Palestinians, how do they say it? Unless you get a part of our peace process, you can't have any sort of status. And so that's the challenge that we have of trying to get our own government to work forcefully to make sure that if there's going to be a peace process, that our own government gets behind it, instead of dragging its heel and protecting the state of Israel with this. So as we sit here in New York City, in the New York City area with the United Nations right next door, one of the things that we always appreciate are the people that live in the New York area going to the UN to be protesting. Now, as a final part of my little presentation, I would just like to say I am so proud of what's going on in New York with Occupy Wall Street. How many of you all have been over to Occupy Wall Street? Yeah, good. And those of you all, how many haven't yet? Okay, we have a bus that's leaving right after this. Yeah. But I know many of you all have been actively involved. I've now visited 15 Occupies throughout the country. On the East Coast, the West Coast, about the middle of the country. And being there with those young men and women. I mean, what is so amazing about this is that the younger people of our country are we've been saying about the war, war rallies and all, where are the kids? Where are the young people? Well, they're here. They're here now, and they're over at Occupy Wall Street and Occupy Sacramento and Occupy Santa Rosa. It's a remarkable time. And groups like Peace Action Staten Island and all of the organizing that you all have been doing on issues of war and peace will be so valuable for these young people. So please take the time, go over, support them in solidarity. I mean, support them, support us, because we are all a part of that. We are the 99%. We are the 99%. And as they do you all know the twinkle sign? You know, rather than applauding, it's hands up like this. And I was told last night in New Hampshire that this is actually the sign language for copy. I copied that, I agree with it, I understand it. So how about everybody do a twinkle for Occupy Wall Street? Yay! Great. I want to thank you all so very much. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.